Yes, you're gonna talk from here.
Okay.
Yes. Can you talk in here? Talk?
If I talk
Yes,
like
we can hear
this,
you. Yes. Can you?
then everyone will hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
So
Hello.
what we can it's on, yes, but you must switch it off now because it's gonna make an echo.
Testing, testing. Testing, testing.
Good morning, everybody. For those who are in the room, I have been instructed that the last 3 rows in this auditorium will be occupied by a contingent of learners who are going to come during the course of the proceedings and leave during the course of the proceedings. So may I please, with your leave, the last 3 rows of this auditorium be unoccupied, because we are anticipating young people who are on a school trip, school tour, whatever, of the CSIR and the NRF campuses. And as and when they come in, we don't want them to be disruptive by asking you to get up and move, and then it disrupts your attention. So rows 1, 2, 3 from the back are out of bounds for our young learners from schools around Mamelodi and Eersterus. I'm told learners, so it would be one of the 2. Best believe it's one of the 2 of those. Learners is up to 18, give or take. It's basic education. We will know those who have walked in late when they sit where they are not supposed to sit. We will expose them, right, collectively. And please don't wait for the MC to out them. You are allowed to out them. The row at the back, the row in front of that, and the row in front of that. 3 rows at the back, out of bounds for our young learners. What do you think we do in our profession? You think we do? I try not to be as.
Morning. Good morning.
5 minutes ago, I made an announcement, and it's pretty clear who was not here 5 minutes ago. How about this for some poetic justice? Rear Admiral Higgs. Rear Admiral Higgs, there in the third back from the rear, is sitting where he's not supposed to be. Mr. Higgs, move 1 row to the front or anywhere else, including Dade Kanyile, move 1 row to the front or anywhere else. And the more I scan the room, there's a lady in, not in red, but in pink. Hey? Ladies and gentlemen, the 3 rows at the back are not to be used for this session or any other session. So those 2 ladies at the back, please move forward. And we cannot start unless and until there's some semblance of order. Is that right, Mr. Sean Scott? Excellent. Just before we start, I'm looking around the room and at least the first 2 speakers are here, which normally is a good sign for us to start, and everybody else will just get on with the program as and when. Did anybody get up to something last night that they would like to share with us? Have an odd experience, get lost in town? Yes, sir. Please do share.
Thank you. I just wanted to share my greatest learning to date from this, and it came from you.
Excellent. Let's settle down and hear the story. Please go ahead, sir.
I was very inspired by your rugby history, and with us being the rugby world champions, it got me thinking about innovation. And I thought to myself, you know, somebody had to innovate by picking up the football. So that's innovation number 1. Innovation number 2 is they realized the round ball was not very good when you
Sure.
carrying it, so they had to innovate the shape. The third innovation, and why we won the World Cup, is we had to be innovative in our game plan, our strategy. But the most important lesson I learned in innovation is this. If you are going to be named after a town, when you are innovating, make sure it's not a town like Kakamas or Buffels met Skootfontein or Helshoogte, because for us to be regarded as the Kakamas, you know, champions of the world may not be the same thing.
I did notice all of those names or words were Afrikaans words. I must say nothing about the language, but that's some poetic.
And just in case people thought I was using a pejorative, Kakamas is not linked to a term in Afrikaans that people suspected me of using. Thank you.
I'm sure. Thank you very much. That's a great story. That's a great story. I've got space for one more story. Anybody feeling the great urge to share something with us that will offer some relief before we get on with the very hardcore substantive engagements of the second day of this International Conference on Public Procurement and Innovation in Africa? It is very true. And perhaps one does wonder how much innovation comes out of frustration, because William Webb Ellis just probably was not a very good soccer player. That's why he felt so frustrated as to pick up a rugby ball. And then the oval shape came on the basis of the fact that the round ball is not particularly easy to carry, in particular under the arm. So rugby came as a result of innovation from soccer. And this is a very good context. Good morning, Barbara. I see you smiling. Are you well? Did you send my message to your countrymen and women last night?
Yes. Not yet, but have no fear.
Now, you can imagine how long it took us to recover when we were walloped 57-0 in Albany. Forever. Yes, sir. One more story from the retired Major General of the South African National Defence Force. So we're in safe company, all right?
So yesterday we were talking about e-procure. Our experience in the army was very different. We found that it is easy with your off-the-shelf goods, ready to use. But when it came to regulated products like your meat and also your technical services, the database is not helpful. What happened with us, Chief Army was on a weekend, he was visiting his neighborhood. And you know, army vehicles are painted brown. You don't have to look for them. They shout at you wherever they are. So he saw this brown vehicle parked alongside the road outside the house. And we got a call and the registration of the vehicle. What is that vehicle doing in the town? Is it reported stolen? So we quickly went into our systems, we checked, and now the vehicle is with the supplier or with the service provider for repairs. So somebody called him and told him, no, the vehicle is gone for repairs. He was more angrier than he was before. He said, but where the vehicle is parked, there is no workshop. This is just a suburb and nothing else. Hey, we run again. Now, how did the vehicle got there? We got the name of the supplier. We called the owner. Said, no, I parked the vehicle in my house, but I'm busy cleaning the house, the garden. So I parked the vehicle outside for the day. And after that, we learned that we needed to, for your meat products or processed products, you need, before you award that specific contract, you need to go and inspect the facility where this service provider is providing the service from, because the database does not allow for that. Anyone can register. There was a time we even found a funeral parlor saying they can supply meat. And we began to wonder which meat are they. These places doing hair, they were providing bread. And you said, but
Bread.
bread, yeah. They were providing bread, or they were registered to provide bread, simply because the system does not have your filters to confirm what is it, are you qualified to do what you are doing?
So in other words, you're remarking on a process-driven system which doesn't allow engagement. And I think, does this not exactly speak to the point that you were addressing earlier on, Meneer Brits, that it's too much of a binary system that we operate under and less engaging in terms of what do we really want to achieve out of this? And let's ask the necessary questions or do what is necessary, of course, within the broader ambit of law to achieve that. Do you want to respond quickly to that against those examples? Thank you so much, sir. Yeah.
So thank you. I do think that digitalization of many of these functions would add huge value. And it really is about talking to the right people about how to do that.
Yeah, important. Well, thank you very, very much, everybody. And if this got on with any bit of momentum, there'd be no need for any of these speakers, because the more somebody speaks, the more one is inspired and the more one is inclined to share some anecdotes of his or her personal experiences in relation to public procurement and innovation. Final announcements. We're about to start. The last 3 rows are not to be occupied, please. We've got young people coming in during the course of the day. Don't quote me on that. And if you don't see me, it doesn't mean they haven't arrived. Mr. Singh, please welcome us again. It's good to see you. And I was very pleased that you were willing to take a photo with me yesterday. And now the entire LinkedIn community of mine knows that I roll around with the big boys, you, Mr. Singh.
I wonder what they must be saying about me. Who's this small boy with the big boy? The folks, by the turnout today, it looks like, we're really doing something right. Normally in these conferences, you find people disappear after they got the sense of what's going on and what the program is like. So thank you for coming back, and thank you for the interest that's been shown. Folks, I want to say good morning to you, and again, share with you, I didn't expect that I would have had to deliver the CEO's address yesterday, but be that as it may, let me share with you today the CFO perspective. As you know, that's the key role that I occupy, and with my years of experience here in the NRF, I virtually can slot in anywhere these days. So yeah. Being the NRF, we receive a significant allocation of public funds for the support of research, innovation, and development. And you'll find that in our NRF Act, the word national development has been inserted there. So all the things that we do, consider it as part and parcel of the contribution to the development of this country, including this conference. As the CFO responsible for finance and supply chain, we have an important public obligation to ensure that the NRF simultaneously derives maximum value for money, but also with the highest level of integrity in managing its scarce resources. And I carefully say scarce resources because there is never an unending pot of money. We have to clamber for resources with National Treasury. We are on a severe drive to raise funding ourselves to supplement the funding that we receive. But those monies that come through into the NRF obviously has got to be spent. And they get spent through supply chain. They get spent through procurement. So for us, public procurement is an important dimension, given the vast amounts of public funds that the NRF expends in support of its statutory mandate. And the NRF has a proud record in achieving this dual function with distinction as we continuously ensure that research innovation is focused on excellence of the highest quality. You will find that applicants for research funding in the NRF go through a robust peer review process. We don't just fund grants. The instruments that we have and the platforms that we have are cutting edge, some of the best in the world. Now, taking those as background and context, in order to procure, to keep those facilities running, we need bleeding edge, cutting edge technology. And where do you find those? Not off the shelf. At the same time, the NRF does this with the highest levels of integrity, as over the years, we have consistently achieved clean audits. And that is not an easy task for us. Some of our high-tech and innovative projects, like we spoke about South African isotope facility that has just been commissioned in July, was it this year, by the Minister of Science and Innovation, is like none other in the country. I mean, you're not going to find another South African isotope facility. So where do you buy these things? You got to build them. You got to get the scarce skills and resources to build them. Likewise, the Meerkat project that we have spoken about, this radio astronomy, square kilometer radio astronomy suite of dishes and antennas that we're installing in the Northern Cape. The history of that is that you may know that we were competing against Australia for the bid. We got the lion's share of that bid because of our radio quiet zone in the Northern Cape. But to do that and to build it is an effort in itself. We have undertaken enormously stressful conditions with the current procurement regulations, but we have delivered on Meerkat. Behind that, we've had high level of scrutiny from the Auditor General of South Africa. And again, such innovative project comes with high risks in the procurement process, not to forget that there's a plethora of compliance regimes, which if you miss one step, could result in the swear word called irregular expenditure. That then immediately results in clean audits gone, despite your best efforts, if it's material enough. Yes, it's doable, and we have proven it as the NRF that within the confines of legislation, that we can build these things, but it comes at an enormous effort. And I believe it can be done better with enabling legislation, with enabling regulations. On this point of enabling legislation and regulation, development of such, from what I have heard and believe and experienced over the years, starts off when we start putting these enabling legislation or these legislations, we start off with preventative measures in mind, which, as we know from our recent country experiences, did not hold us in good stead. People find ways. The crooks become more innovative in procurement. So where is the balance that we need to draw? There's somebody that I met here yesterday from the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council. Are you here today in the audience? Lindiwe, your colleague. So just last week at the National Anti-Corruption Advisory Council dialogue in Boksburg on building a corruption-free South Africa, the famous Chief Justice Zondo said, and I quote, "Levels of corruption have reached completely unacceptable proportions. Most of the corruption we get in South Africa is in the area of public procurement. If we can close the taps in public procurement, we will make a big difference in our fight against corruption." We recommended the establishment of a public anti-corruption agency. I'm sure Estelle is hearing. We see that the Public Procurement Bill of 2023 does not have such an institution like that. He went on to say, unless something very drastic and effective is done soon, we will have no country worth calling our home. But that doesn't mean that the cases that he is presided over or listened to, the range of people, that is going to go away after all of these things, after his report. As you know, no one has gone seriously to jail yet. And that is a serious concern. But the NRF, bringing it back home, the NRF goes beyond simply being an excellent steward of public resources. It employs innovative ethos within its own corporate operations and continuously pursues new innovative ways of running its business to the advantage of its stakeholders. Example, the recent implementation of an integrated real-time ERP system. We've managed to do this, colleagues, and we did it over the COVID period. So yesterday's question about the ERP with National Treasury and why we're not getting it right, etc. And I know Skalk said that it starts off with specifications, but it doesn't always. It's about how you deliver on it once you have procured it, how it's managed, how you engage with the service provider. It's project management at the end of the day. You can buy the best thing in the world. If the people that are there don't implement those things properly, it's not going to happen. If we don't have the excellent engineers in the NRF that are building the square kilometer array and the oversight, it's not going to happen. I must say, though, and we know what the media has said about some of these ERP projects. We've done this ERP project with no cost overruns from the bid price, the original bid price. We've kept it in there. We're going to close out that report now in end of November, December, and take that through to our board. This is also true for the NRF's procurement function in that it is continuously engaged in improving its performance and exploring new innovative ways in which it can acquire goods and services. I challenge my team and keep them on their toes. And that is why we are here today. That is why we're bringing people together to say, what can we do better? What's the next level? Year on year, we do that. One such example in the NRF, and when Ron and team brought this, and I said, how are you going to implement, is the use of framework agreements. I think somebody had it on the slides yesterday. And again, pushing boundaries, for example, the comprehensive inputs that we've made into the public procurement bill. I would like to see any other organizations input into the public procurement bill compared to ours. Was it you, Sean? Are you confirming? Have you seen the others? You probably have a good sense. You haven't seen them, but colleagues, we've really dug in deep. I mean, Hugh is nodding his head, and he knows that we made use of the colleagues outside of the NRF to insert ourselves in that process. I heard from Ron this morning that, is it Parliament has asked that those submissions be, Ron, just confirm what you said? Is it due day is today or something? Estelle?
Yeah, so from what I could gather, the submissions or the public hearings and the submissions that were made has to be submitted, or the comment to those public hearing comments has to be submitted to Parliament by the end of today. And our CPO and DG has to appear at Parliament on Friday.
Wow.
Yeah.
So things are starting to move.
Yes.
And we hope that it just doesn't become an exercise to say we have consulted. Because that's the biggest fear that we have. That, you know, a lot of legislation and things happen and say we've consulted, but nothing changes at the end of the day. And we've put in quite a tremendous amount of work and effort in that. Again, the NRF's commitment to research, innovation, and being a learning organization across all its operations are exemplified by this conference. I've said that time and time again since the start of the colloquium on Monday. We must challenge ourselves if we are to step up and accept that established practices are constantly being challenged in this modern era of global convergence. Practices, global convergence, technological and digital advancements, as well as lessons learned from the supply chain disruptions as we experience by COVID-19. And we need to take these lessons and continuously build on them. We cannot have regulations and legislations that stuck in the mud. It must be built for relevance. And it needs to be consistently, time and time again, reviewed. In the NRF, our supply chain policies almost go through a review every year. Almost every year. And I'm hoping that other organizations do the same. We have, over the 3 days, brought together leading experts, researchers, practitioners, and policymakers in pursuit of the change that we want to steer. Together, colleagues, we need to confront the blockages and set new paradigms in the procurement arena. And that is the endeavor. That's what we want to achieve out of this. I know my colleagues, and we've had the discussions already, you'll see us sometime just breaking away here and there and say, what are we going to do next? And that's what we are plotting. What do we do with all this information that we gather out of this conference? You've heard Mr. Patel yesterday on behalf of the minister say that he needs a 2-pager from the NRF. We'll do that. We're good at these things. We're a research-led and driven organization. And I'm sure we will put something on the table. So colleagues, with that, I also want to acknowledge the great work that is done by Prof. Hio Kino and his team. We would have not been able to lead and organize this event without your support, without the support of the African Procurement Law Unit, and more importantly, the networks that you have created that have brought people from far and wide to this conference. And also the quick response time of some of your acquaintances, colleagues, students. I'm not sure who, there's one here, there's one rocked up yesterday. So that's the kind of system we want to build. Here, thank you very much for creating that network. I know I said on Monday that many times we have gone back to you to say, here we have gotten into trouble from a legal SCM perspective, help. And I can tell you that help came. We swam out of all of those troubles, whether it's the AG, whether it is our board, whether it's our own executive. And that help, I cannot say, how openly it comes through to us. You're always willing to put your hand up. So thank you once again. And those efforts are well recognized and acknowledged, and to your team as well. Thank you very, very much, colleagues. And may the next couple of hours till the end of this day be a fruitful one. We've got quite a few presentations lined up. So again, thank you, Master of Ceremony. I wouldn't take the bag. This bag I'll give to you. I had one yesterday.
Everybody. Now you know what is to be done when you get a bag. Give it back to where it comes from.
Give it to the man who deserves it more. Okay, enjoy it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay. What parcel? And then?
You can't have that now.
No. I gave him the package, he gave it back. This was all mine. As I call up Professors Edquist and Knight, I am minded to just remind, and this is relevant to you, especially there, Nick. Overnight, they fumigated those seats in rows at the back, the 3 rows at the back. They're doing pest control. Now, you won't feel it, but it will discolor your clothes. So you are encouraged to sit more to the front, because the 3 rows at the back, there's some chemical there that is working its magic with the pests and the bugs and all of those things. So please move forward. Don't, when you get back to Wales, Cardiff, you discover your clothes have been discolored, start blaming the NRF or the African Procurement Law Unit. So you are encouraged to sit in the front. That's why nobody else is sitting there. You are the only one there, Nick. That's Nick. That's Nick. So please, Nick, come to the front before we start the next session, Nick. Professor Edquist, please come to the front and to the platform. Now, Professor Edquist is the Circle Chair, and by that I mean he's the Chair in Innovation Research at the Center for Innovation Research at Lund University in Sweden. He's the Ruben Rousing Chair at Circle. Professor Knight is a professor in public sector and healthcare procurement at the University of Twente in the Netherlands. It is my absolute privilege and pleasure to invite them to the stage, and in particular, Charles, to offer remarks on functional public procurement for innovation, welfare, as well as sustainability.
Before I start to talk about my topic, I want to mention that there are many conferences globally on innovation, and there are many conferences on public procurement. There is not much on the overlap between the two. And I congratulate the NRF to have taken this initiative. It's going to prove to be important in the future. And now I will speak about the topic, which you can read here. And it's based on a number of publications. of which I want to mention this beautiful book. It's called Holistic Innovation Policy. And it deals exactly with that, how to have a total grips on this. Innovations. I have to start with innovations because they have transformed our societies enormously during the last 200 years. Nothing has been more transforming or transformative. Baumol is a famous economist, and he stressed this. And innovations are the most important source of creation of welfare, because welfare is what you can use to raise salaries, increase profits, and elevate taxes. And innovations also have an enormous impact on the environment, climate, and health, negative and positive. And it's a matter of influencing that. And for the time being, it is important to use innovations as a means to change in the right direction. Public procurement. Well, everyone knows that. It's when public agencies buy goods, services, and buildings. And this is an interactive relation between public buyers and private suppliers. The World Trade Organization covers public procurement of $1.7 trillion every year. And 1 trillion has 12 zeros. It's a lot. Much more than people thought about 5-10 years ago. And in Sweden, for example, which I know best since I'm from there, 18% of GDP is public procurement. And this is the same size as industrial production in Sweden. Most people don't think about that this is so huge. There is a lot of talk about research and development, and it's 3-4% in some countries. The public part of R&D is 1%. So public procurement is much, much bigger than research and development. At the same time, when we talk about innovation, we often say that research and development is the nucleus or the center of innovation. I was myself not aware of this some years ago. This distinction, and this is probably the most important picture I'm going to show. I want to make a distinction between product procurement and functional procurement. Product procurement is when the buyer describes an existing product that he wants to buy. Functional procurement. In functional procurement, you do not describe products. Instead, you want to buy products which perform functions that provide solutions to the problems are bought. It's a very different thing to buy a specific product and to buy a solution to a problem. Climate, environment, productivity, whatever. So if you're going to remember one picture that I showed today, this is it. Most procurement is done by describing products. It's often done in a routine-like manner. The same product as last year is described and demanded. It's often cut and paste. Even obsolete products may be described. But what is called innovation procurement, if it would mean describing an innovation is something that do not exist yet. If you want to do that, it's impossible. You cannot describe something that you don't know about. So only existing products can be described, which means that they cannot be innovations. People get shocked sometimes and sometimes very critical when I say this, and I'm happy to discuss this. But this means actually that innovations are impossible in almost 20% of the Swedish economy. And it's pretty much the same in other countries. The figures can be taken up, dug up in various countries. The figures differ, but public procurement is always bigger than research and development. So functional procurement, that is not used very much, but it is starting to be used. This is about describing a problem that you want to solve. Right? The buyer describes what shall be achieved, not how it shall be done. The functions must be fulfilled. It does not matter how this is achieved. You have an objective like smaller emission of CO2, and if you achieve this in one or the other way, it doesn't really matter. And functional procurement can be instrumental in this. Let me give one example. Noise reduction. You have a big road and you have apartments, which means a noise problem. The authorities, they described and order a noise fence by beton or wood. They should not do that. They should order 62 decibel in the first apartment. This is a very simplistic example, but this is being done in some countries. But we see much more walls in beton and wood. And they are not very beautiful when we go on the roads. There are alternatives to describing a fence. And that's lower speeds, electric cars, more quiet asphalt, and you can bend sound-wise upwards, not along the ground. Such functional procurement opens for innovations. That is new products, goods and services. Higher quality public services based on the new products procured. Some of the new products may change the direction of innovation processes, and they may also change the speed. And higher productivity in society leads to increased welfare. As I said, higher wages, higher profits, higher taxes, if you want. And functional procurement also means increased competition. Competition between different suppliers, between different firms, or also between different products intended to solve the same problem. There are several solutions to the same problem, which means that you can make it innovations by concentrating on these problems solving. As I said, public procurement is large in all countries, much larger than research and development. And these enormous funds, they are lying on the table on the 1st of January every year. This 18% of GDP in Sweden, for example. In Peru, it's 9%. In Korea, it's 11%, and so on. And this money is available every year, and it's in the budget. So, if a substantial proportion of public procurement is transformed, this may be a more powerful innovation policy instrument than research and development. Much more powerful. That's not generally accepted. I think I did talk about these figures that a few countries have some spending. But if used to enhance functional procurement, this may mean more innovation, productivity gains, and climate improvements in all countries. So, when I started to talk about functional procurement, people protested and said, no, it's not allowed. You cannot do that. And I cannot talk about all countries, even represented here, but I can talk about European Union. And they say that functional and performance-related requirements are appropriate means to favor innovation in public procurement, and it should be used as widely as possible. And this is a quote from the EU procurement directives. I don't know about all the other countries, but it can be found out. Sweden was for some time ahead of other countries in this respect. The Prime Minister, he appointed a minister responsible for procurement, a minister, I mean, highest level. And the Prime Minister, he was creating something called a National Innovation Council. And it dealt, among other things, with procurement, functional procurement. And who was the chairman of that? Yes, it was the Prime Minister. He appointed himself to be the chairman of this council. And I had the privilege of being a member of that council for 4 years. It was extremely interesting, getting politics and research so closely connected. There were 15 members and of that council, and after some time and a lot of discussions, all 15 agreed that functional procurement should be used much more. And it is slowly happening. And there is a procurement strategy developed by the Swedish government. And it came out of this National Innovation Council. And it took only half a year to develop that strategy, and it's still valid. The National Innovation Council is no longer there because politics change things and politics change governments and so on. I cannot go into detail on that. Some further characteristics. It means that old products are forced to compete with new products when it comes to fulfillment of functions. But the process can end with procurement of the old product. I mean, it's in competition, both of them, and they might compete with each other. But in some cases, there is no ready-made solution, and it might require an innovation to be solved. And if you have the problem, then you can say that we want to have that problem solved by you, the suppliers, the firms. And this is all these 18% of GDP is public. And that developing this might influence the direction of innovation processes and fulfill objectives for climate, innovation, environment, and health. The significance of functional procurement. Well, I think I have talked about that, and we can get back to that in the discussion. But it is much larger than anyone imagined it could be very recently. Proposal for the future. The proportion of all public procurement that is performed in functional terms shall be increased by 5 percentage points per year during the next 5 years. When 25% of all public procurement has been achieved after these 5 years, the program should be evaluated and new decisions taken, of course. But this would liberate creativity and innovation in a very large part of the economy, since it would concern 5% of GDP, which is also huge. And as I said, it will increase competition between suppliers and between products. In terms of innovation policy, which this book deals with, it would also mean stressing the demand side in innovation policy, not only research and development. Demand side is also very important. And it is called in the book by Susanna Boras and myself, it's called a holistic view on innovation policy. Thanks a lot. That's what I wanted to say. And this, it was what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I was listening to both professors of the African Procurement Law Unit, both to my left and right, and one, there was consensus, there's no way that this speaker is going to be interrupted, and two, we should organize some NRF funds to get him to Stellenbosch very quickly, even as a guest lecturer for the Public Procurement Law postgraduate studies at LLM, as well as postgraduate diploma level. So interesting that was, and I certainly do remember that. If for nothing else, remember this: functional procurement. I do, and I always show. Thank you so much, Professor Edquist. Professor Knight? Yes, your turn. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Clicker. Clicker? Is this it?
Yeah, yes. Just the green button.
Okay, right. Okay, good morning. Thank you very much for the invitation, NRF. Rio. It's a great privilege to be here today. And I'm a Brit, but I left Britain before Brexit. So I'm here with my European hat on. I'm a European first. And what I'd like to do today is draw out some lessons of the 15-year-long experience in the European Union to implement innovation and procurement. And through that, to think, perhaps help think ahead of what advantage you might gain from watching what others have done, what pitfalls they've experienced, what's held them up, and are there ways of perhaps fast tracking or even leapfrogging forward to be able to avoid some of the delays, because there isn't much time, is there, to make a difference. And what I want to do is use a couple of concepts or theories, I suppose, which I'm drawing on from dating way back. So network learning is what I did for my PhD. I haven't directly researched network learning since then, but I do see it being used by others as a framing device for going beyond looking at the learning organization, which I know NRF is. I learned that this morning, and going forward towards looking at networks. So here we're talking about multiple stakeholders having to come together to realize procurement of innovation. And so that network learning idea, I think, has perhaps got something to offer. Now, the other thing I'm less familiar with is theories of change, which is used in evaluating large programs, particularly in a development context, I understand. But what I recently examined a PhD, and I found myself reading more about it, and I'm thinking, hey, there's something we can use here as well, because the idea of the theories of change model is that there should be consultation between the stakeholders and a shared conception of what is it we're trying to change, how does the system change. So it brings out this system perspective, and both of them do. However, what we find is that, well, it's a fairly heavy title. So what I wanted to focus on is really the title is about mainstreaming public procurement of innovation and bringing a systems perspective to it. And the idea being we want to reduce both of the arrows in that figure. So we want to compress the time we're going to take to make the change happen, and also minimize the percentage that we leave behind. So sort of keep that plateau as high up towards 100% as possible. And how do I come to be here? What baggage am I bringing? What insights, what learning am I bringing? Back in 2003, well, Jane mentioned the ERSP initiative, which we are now preparing for ERSP 10, and they run every couple of years. I was there at the first one, coordinating the workshop with Jan Telgen and Christine Harland, who were the leaders of the initiators of this. And the most, for us, that Christine, Jan and myself, the most exciting case study that we learned from was the South African case study. And that's what helped us put the top two tiers up in that top left corner, where we understood that going far beyond value for money, which obviously is important, but going up that ladder, we're talking about meeting policy objectives. And even, I dare say, we could start to say procurement at its best should be helping to shape those policy objectives, because we should be helping government to understand what can be done with and through the businesses that exist in our ecosystem. So perhaps there should be an 8th layer to that ladder. And we published a book. Now, things like the digitalization agenda perhaps has moved on a lot since then, but plenty of the chapters, I would suggest, are still relevant today. And I arrived in the Netherlands in 2019. and then joined UT, University of Twente, in 2020, sorry, and rapidly got involved in the Urban Agenda Partnership for Innovative and Responsible Public Procurement. And this is a network of cities across Europe, supported by a bunch of other partners, of which UT is one of them, looking to develop responsible procurement. And this is across all of Europe, and there's huge varieties I'll come on to. But the Urban Agenda Partnerships were set up by the European Commission as a mechanism to directly be able to talk to cities, because their existing channels of communication were through the nation state, and they wanted to change that pattern of communication. The responsible procurement one has endured, is now in its second round, but it comes with lots of kudos but no money. So we jointly bid for some European funding for what's a scheme which is about implementation of procurement of innovation. And we won and have set up the preceding project, which is now in its second and final year. And I lead that project. We're working with a couple of cities and a couple of consultancy firms that are closely involved in European projects. And what we're doing there is trying to increase the access to resources and also increase channels through to the educators, because we need to draw that young talent into our profession. And most recently, I've got involved in looking at markets, which I've alluded to, but that's not so much where I'm going to go to. But if you're interested in that image, my recent inaugural lecture covers that. So what I'm looking at is drawing together this network learning and this theory of change concepts, because if we can think about network learning, using that in a prospective way to develop our strategic plans for development, and then we're also, that theory of change idea is a sort of an evaluation concept. I think we can use them both in order to promote procurement of innovation. And when I'm talking about procurement of innovation, I am taking a very broad view. I have to say I'm very much thinking along the lines of Jacob Edler's presentation yesterday, very concerned with how can we become more innovative with regards to the huge transitions that are ahead of us. And sometimes that's quite low tech. Sometimes the innovation is about perhaps combining several low tech things and new ways, new partnerships, new relationships to make things happen. And sometimes, of course, it is very high tech, but not necessarily. And I want to move on now to give you a bit of context around the European space and relating it to some figures that we heard yesterday. Obviously, a lot of talk about corruption. So we have a huge range in the European Union. We have the best as far as the Transparency International Index, and also in Eastern Europe in particular, we still have significant problems. And digitalization is considered to be a key mechanism for trying to address that. We also have lots of innovation funding related to what we were hearing yesterday about TIA, and just last night on LinkedIn comes through about this 1 billion investment. But when you look at the number of companies being supported, it's 159, right? So the figures that we heard yesterday are pretty good pro rata. And thinking now about specifically strategic public procurement and the European Union, in 2017, it was announced that this would all be centered around these 6 pillars, and then a 7th was added. And as you can see there in the top one, innovation is one of 3 aspects where strategic procurement, around which we revolve strategic procurement. And that is green, social, and innovation. And I like the term that Barbara used yesterday, progressive procurement, because strategic procurement is, it's commonplace. It's what we were using when we were doing the work in ERSP3 and since then. But for me, the idea of progressive procurement also brings in the sort of climate transition, the just transition, and notions which are much broader, I think, than strategic procurement, which could apply in a for-profit manufacturing organization. But these don't, this top one doesn't happen in isolation. We have other very important elements, including professionalization and the other ones, as you can read there. And just to highlight the professionalization one, I don't need you to read all the text, but just those 3 areas, just to show that, yes, we're talking about the training of individuals, but there's much more to it. So it's what organizational structures are they working in? How are they enabled? So back to the enabling environment that we've been hearing. It's the HR people. Now we have an issue with the aging workforce in our specialism of procurement. So that is something that has to be actively managed. and then the systems and tools. And a couple of years ago, there was a competence framework published for made so that it could be generic and could be used in any European country to try and up the standards. We also have a whole bunch of procedures. What I've done with the presentation is I've embedded lots of links and given references so that I'm happy to share the slides and then you can click through. So I'm rushing past some of them, but you can easily dip in as suits your personal interest later if you wish. So there's this very nice pamphlet, very accessible, which sets out, and I'm sorry, this is where, oh no, it doesn't show there, but it does show there, very good. The different types of instruments that are possible. And again, those were mentioned yesterday. I'm not a lawyer. I come to public procurement from a business and organization studies perspective. So I don't want to dwell on these, but just to signal, of course, these are a very important part of the picture. And the latest iteration of these procedures was published in 2014, and each of the countries had to embody it in their national regulations and legislation by 2018. So we're still going along this learning curve. And there has been plenty of investment, but actually, when you look at the progress, it ain't so good. There's one country that scores very well when it comes to how it's doing on the procurement of innovation front, and that is Finland. And then you can see in the yellow next to the red, which is Finland, it seems back to front, I don't know why, it should be green, right? But the other Scandinavian countries, the UK, because this report was done before Brexit, the Netherlands, Belgium and Spain are all doing okay. But what you also see is the Eastern European countries behind the curve. And their compliance procurement is a big thing. Their corruption is a big thing. It's very much administrative competence, administrative accuracy is all over and above the strategic, the entrepreneurship and so on. This report is something I only discovered as I was preparing this presentation, but I think it has a nice resource in it. I'm sorry it's so small, but we have a sort of projection constraint. But even looking at the indices might be quite interesting for people who are planning and trying to sort of develop your strategies. You might get some sources of inspiration from this. Because the consultancy firm, and I can't remember which one, but it's one of the big four that was doing this evaluation for the Commission, was developed this methodology. And they're actually now doing the second benchmarking exercise. So I'm very curious to see how that will develop. But what they're looking at from this top-down view, and this is a national benchmarking exercise, they're looking at issues like how embedded procurement of innovation is in other policies, innovation policies, and so on. And they're also saying how embedded is it in sectoral policies. So they're just looking for those connections at the policy level. And then they're saying, do we have action plans? Do we see spending targets and so on? You could read it. How do we? Yeah, there we go. I have to keep clicking it, right? And it comes up. Okay. No, I've gone on. Right, okay. But there are multiple factors in here. And what I wanted to do is just highlight a couple of them. So this shows the horizontal policies that they're advocating we should have. And if you look along the bottom, you can see the kinds of policies that they're looking to see whether there's connections. And ICT has its own category all on its own. And from this, they build up this scoring system. And what you might notice is that, well, Finland is second, right? And Estonia, to the east, is top, but Estonia is fully digital. So they are absolutely top on digital. And I guess that's why they have this, you wouldn't bother to go digital and then not look for integration as a key part of it. So what's also quite interesting, again, if you just want to do a bit of your own research, is a nice resource for them thinking, so how come the high scorers are where they are? What is the difference? And what you might have noticed is Denmark is a low scorer, and yet the Scandinavian countries are considered to be the leads of Scandinavia, Netherlands, and then pre-Brexit, the UK as well. But there's pretty good coverage here, right? However, if we look at the support mechanisms that are put in place, and again, please look along the bottom of this slide to see the sorts of things they're looking for. you can see that there's a whole lot of countries with nothing. And then I was trying to map it quickly this morning, but I do think Sweden is doing very well and has a bit of everything. But I guess the fact that they don't get to 100 means that they're not doing enough of some of the things. I'm not quite sure. You'd need to look at it more closely. But again, you can see the different kinds of support that's available. And notice that the template tender documents are pretty rare. And yet it is something that we have heard as being important. So here we are, 2023. That survey was done in 2018. That report was published in 2021. And now 5 years on, they're doing another one. And I'm so curious to hear what will be the results. Under the preceding project, we've just completed a series of interviews with procurement leaders in municipalities all across Europe, asking them about how they lead the implementation and the embedding of procurement of innovation. So really what they're doing for the leadership and the sort of development within their organization. And also we hear a lot, obviously, when we're at conferences and so on, about what's seen as the problem from the top-down perspective. And just like we've heard over the last couple of days, risk aversion, the need for cultural change, they're center stage. There's lots of others as well. We've got a report that we will produce a white paper at the end of this month. Again, if you'd like to see that, I'll be happy to share it. And there'll be more information about this sort of bottom-up side is what will be in the report. And you see sort of common ground between this top-down and bottom-up. Where they differ, though, is who's accountable for sorting it out. How are we going to resolve these problems? That's where you get some tensions. What I think is nice to do, and what we can do from these interviews, is also say, so what do we see as what explains success? And this is just off the top of my head, having recently done the interviews. My colleague is doing the close analysis, and we'll be writing it up in the next, well, we don't have long, do we? End of the month. But actively seeking opportunities. It's very entrepreneurial being good at procurement of innovation. You need that network. You need to know who cares about what. What are your colleagues in the other functions worrying about? What pressures are they under? How can you, from procurement point of view, help them? So seeking out those opportunities in the relational way, which fits very much with what you were saying yesterday, Hayo. But also having this sort of annual cycle of planning so that you can really see what's coming across the horizon. Of course, there's the emergency requirements and so on, but having the space in their agenda to be able to look at every opportunity and systematically think about, everything over a certain threshold or even below certain finance thresholds. Could we innovate on this front? Because you can't do this innovation work if you're always racing against the clock. And we had some people we were trying to approach for interviews and they go, we don't really do procurement of innovation. And what they were saying is they're not using these instruments, but of course they're innovating. These are people who are quite relatively mature in their procurement practices, and they are at these networks that we're involved with because they want to learn more, they want to improve. But what we notice is very often it was against the sustainability agenda that they're innovating. One of the places we interviewed was actually proper innovation-led, and they were coming at it from an infrastructure perspective. So they were looking circular economy and infrastructure, and therefore looking at higher value and complexity. And then building expertise and capacity. They were adopting various tactics for that. Centralizing training, centralizing expertise, but there's different ways of centralizing, right? So agencies would have staff who could, on a sort of more like a consultancy basis, support local teams. The local teams were reorganizing. They were saying one very successful municipality said, we just delegated all the low value procurement because we have to concentrate, we have to prioritize. So the 6 people that sit in the center of this small municipality can do the really more mature and advanced and strategic procurement. And then there's these various networks. Again, I've put links in. The Big Buyers Group is receiving more European Commission funding and is going into round 3. So that's, the casual way of putting it might be a talking shop. But what they're doing is they're talking to the market together and so on at EU level. So that way you get to the really top people in the sales departments of these major manufacturers, rather than just speaking to the local country rep or regional rep. So they are influencing and market shaping through that. So how do you conceptualize this? Where does network learning and theory of change come in? Learning, it's a long time ago now since I was reading all the literature closely, but of course there were big arguments. Learning is about what you know, learning is about how you behave. Well, of course, I would say it's both, right? It has to be your knowledge, and it needs to also be represented in your behavior. And then some people say, oh, well, organizations can't learn, only people can learn. But in fact, what I would say is that organizations and networks can be said to be learning. Obviously, there's not a direct correspondence, but you can translate the ideas of learning up through the system. And I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, the theory of change side is about not oversimplifying. It's about having a genuinely systemic perspective on things, and making sure that you don't assume sort of pull this lever and you'll get this behavior, because very often that isn't the case. We know that, but we still tend to make plans as if that's true. And it involves stakeholder engagement and recognizing early on that we come to a joint program with different concepts of what's involved, what we're looking for, and so on, and having that dialogue early on, and then evaluating against that dialogue. And of course, what you'll come up with are sort of big causal map, which will show how you think your outputs and your outcomes and your impact will align. First of all, you have to get some degree of consensus on that, and then you have to think how we could measure it. I haven't used a theory of change idea, but I just think there's something in here that could be adapted and combined with network learning to help really start to cope with the complexity. Because what we've heard over the last couple of days, there's so many different variables, there's so many different levels. So how do we jointly frame it and talk about it? I think there might be something here. And to illustrate it a little bit more concretely, although this is still very much at a conceptual level, if we talk about individuals, you know, if we want them to change and learn, we're perhaps looking at their beliefs, we're looking at their knowledge, we're looking at their motivation, and then we look at what they actually do on the job. Taking that idea up a level to the organization, you would say, well, our values and the knowledge and the commitment could be the more kind of cognitive type things. And then, of course, what are our organizational practices? How do we actually work in this organization? What are our norms in terms of practices? And then it gets a little bit more difficult at the network level. That's more diffuse. And now we'd say ecosystem. That's the word you'd use today. And what we're talking about is this enduring and widespread change. What kinds of things would you observe if you had achieved what you're jointly talking about, your aspirations? Because again, I think we tend to think about things that we can observe at the organizational level, but actually we want system change, so ecosystem change. So we have to find a way of capturing that. And again, I think these ideas of network learning might help here. And of course, what you might be doing is thinking along multiple channels. So you might take a perspective thinking more about local government and apply that. Or you might take a perspective which is more thinking about where we're talking about high-tech innovation. So these sort of darker blue lines could be subsets of the whole. But still, it's this multiple layers, and it's thinking about widespread adoption of change and visioning that. So to close, I just want to sort of pull together some ideas. And to start with, I was using this idea of technological leapfrogging, which is also something for sort of mobile telephony and so on, was an inspiration from the innovation literature, and often came out in terms of the farming and entrepreneurship in Africa. But I think actually it's not all about leapfrogging. It's just keeping an eye on the horizon and slightly beyond the horizon of understanding what we can do today to help maximize the rate at which we change, and thinking a step ahead. This top-down linear view is not going to serve well, right? Too much focus on legislation, regulation, and use cases. I think that could be problematic because we tend to get distracted by these hotspots, these highlights. But what we have to look at is the whole system. Being integrative, but also opportunistic. So, you know, finding what matters to other people and rolling with that, and then people learn about innovation and procurement, and then you can do it again in other ways and sort of be more directive perhaps. And the additive simply is not enough, right? We have to look for these multiplier effects. And one of our interviewees talked about 80-20. He said, my people are spending 80% of their effort on compliance and 20% on the creative, understanding the needs and all the rest of it. He says, I need it to be the other way around. And I find that quite a good way, because of course there's still lots of work to be done around the compliance side, but the 80% should be much more creative, entrepreneurial, relational, and so on. And do the current people we employ have the skill set for that? And if not, how are we going to make more attractive jobs and bring in people from perhaps students from different disciplines, maybe business students as well as lawyers, as well as engineers? Benchmarking, I would think that this national benchmarking exercise there could be a complementary one at different levels. I'm looking forward to seeing the next one. Maybe there's something more to be done with that. And then engaging all stakeholders, the internal ones, but the one I don't hear about is the gap, is the industry. I think it was mentioned in the last couple of days, but not as much. I would suggest that we tend to be a bit introspective when we're talking about procurement and we look at what we're doing on the public side. But of course, industry needs that capacity, and it's not just the small entrepreneurial firms, it's the big firms. That they can drag their heels if they want to, and they might not say it, but they can make a big difference, or they can be part of this multiplier effect. So thank you very much for your attention. I'm in a large research group called Ellipse, and we all do procurement, and we love it. 5 of us do public and healthcare procurement, and also the Proceeding project. If you would like a copy of the slides or the white paper we're soon going to be publishing, there's a tiny URL which you're very welcome to send me your details, and we'll share that with you when it's ready. Thank you very much. I will.
As I asked Charles to come up on stage to field now questions from the floor, I have been advised, because the time is 10:20, and by right on the program, we really should be at 9:50. In other words, we are 30 minutes behind. So I am going to please request that we take a round of questions limited to 4, and then the balance of the time will be offered to Charles and Louise for the purposes of their responses. At least allow me that. If I should get another head nod from Gio, and then I'll open up the floor again, but he is really the client that I need to serve, because he is serving NRF. I know who pays the piper. Questions. I'm going to give you a number, and just to make it easier, we're working the same way as we did yesterday. When 1 is done, 2 goes, and then 3, and then 4. If 2, for instance, does not go, and I say 3, 2 has forfeited 1's position. Anybody not understand? Excellent. 1, 2, 3. 3. Don't be shy, guys. 3. Final one. Even if you are thinking you might need to ask a question, just put your hand up as number 4. 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's try. Let's see if it works.
It's me, eh? Yes. Louise, good morning. I'm Vincent, Vincent Spannenberg.
So please speak closer to the mic. They
Okay.
can't hear you on the acoustics.
Louise is Vincent. I like the way you've captured the importance of capacity building, both within internal the organization and externally. Now, considering that we are pushing towards procurement law reform to enable functional procurement, the challenge that in the space where we work is that we produce nuclear medicine as one of the outputs. So in terms of the problem understanding, we need the clinicians to identify the problem. We need the large companies to assist with issues around regulations and funding and those things. You probably need the SMMEs to look at the finer processing, the finer engineering. So it's quite a myriad of partners, as well as internally you need physicists, you need engineers. So there's quite a lot of people that you need to do capacity building with around the issue of this new thinking of functional procurement and in that space. So in a country where I think competence of people and competence of infrastructure is potentially challenging, I'd like to get your thoughts around what are some of the first things that we need to think about whilst we're also looking at procurement law reform for functional procurement and so on. I hope it's clear enough.
Yeah, we'll take all the questions. Two. A question from the live stream, and it's for Professor Charles Edquist. If we take your functional procurement example of the road noise, how does one specify the criteria in the actual specification? The wall is easy to specify, it's easy to measure, but if you use a functional specification, you could get a wall, you could get a road surface coating, there could be various ways. How do you practically manage that as a procurement practitioner?
So 3A, a question to Professor Edquist, really following up on that. I'm interested to hear thoughts about risk in that approach. Because if you're only procuring a proposed solution, of course, it seems to me that there's more risk there than procuring something that you know beforehand this is going to do the job. So you're, in a sense, then perhaps, and that's the question, if you are, forced to take a bit of a leap of faith in whether what's been offered is going to deliver the outcome, since you can only measure it at the end. So if you take your example, you can only measure the decibels in the apartment after delivery. There's nothing really before. So I'm quite interested how that plays out. 3B, Louise, you made the remark, let's get to that, that you think public procurement should perhaps also play a larger role in framing the policy agenda. I'm quite curious what you meant by that. Yeah, just if you can elaborate a little bit on that, that'll be great. Thank you.
Yep, that's me. Professor Knight, really excited to see that you're got the theory of change in there as a way to think through evaluation. One of the things we don't do enough of at all is build in evaluation at the beginning of projects. It's so often at the very end we decide, oh, we should look and see what we learned, and oh, it's too late. But if you build in a theory of change at the beginning, you're naturally doing it all the way along. And I see a really good I see it in process and in services, and I'm wondering if you, I know it's early days and you're thinking around that, but sort of on the product innovation side, how well that might suit. Just some comments maybe that you might have about how to think that through from a theory of change perspective.
I was better equipped when you believed. Risk in procurement, for example. Of course, there are risks and probably larger risks in functional procurement than in product procurement. But in product procurement, you know that you will not get an innovation. And if that's 18% of the national economy, like in Sweden, this is something that should be taken into account. But of course, it's risky and it's a lot of uncertainty. And that has to be dealt with. And this risk is probably one reason why the functional procurement is growing less rapidly. With regard to the noise, there is one advantage with this example, the noise. The result can be measured in decibel. You can build a laboratory where you can measure how many decibels are achieved by the wall and by means of other solutions. At the same time, I want to say that it is difficult to do this, and it has to be done thoroughly. Maybe I can say one more thing, and that is that we have been close to that, but the one reason why the functional procurement is not growing rapidly is that I don't know how to put it, that there is no procedure for this, and we should have a procedure for functional procurement, and it does not exist. And it would be important to get that developed. Thank you for now.
Just before you, Prof, is this risk question really as great as you are making it out to be? The risk, put your mic on. I mean, the product-based procurement is risky, we all know. I mean, this is what largely we are doing in this country, and the procurement outcomes certainly confirm that they're not nearly as optimal as perhaps what they should be. But two, you don't have to buy what you're not certain about or as reasonably satisfied about, even if you don't know what it is or what it was. And that decision is not made at the time where you actually have to pay for the service. It's made where you are reducing this to a contract, one. And that happens because presumably you would have had these discussions to get your head around this. You are not just having one discussion with one potential service provider, but with everybody else. Would it therefore then be as risky as I thought the question sounded like?
No, absolutely. And I mean, I fully agree with you. I think, as Charles has also said, it really does require us only to pay a little bit more attention to the risk profile. And I think many procurement scholars from all disciplines would agree that risk is probably a concept that we've not paid enough attention to in thinking about procurement. Definitely from a legal point of view, I think we will have to sit down and think a little bit differently about the risk. But I'm in no way suggesting that simply because there is risk at a somewhat different point than what we are used to, that we shouldn't deal with it. I think perhaps in its most simplest, functional procurement would call for a shift in your main or important risk mitigation strategy from specifications point, where I think currently a lot of the risk management happens in, let's specify in a way that we can be absolutely certain, to the contract stage. And there, you're right? So if we come back to the example of the road, which incidentally, Charles, I always use when I teach students on this, a great example, you can put in the contract that you're only going to get final payment once we've measured the decibels in that apartment. And if it's at or below, you get payment. Nothing strange about that. And if you don't have faith in your solution, then you shouldn't participate. But it does, in my view, just calls for a little bit better awareness of the risk profiles, perhaps a little bit different in the transaction, and then shifting it. Thanks.
Could I just add to that, that I think, for example, you can take out the uncertainty with regard to the specification with these innovation partnerships. And there's an example that I can add into the slides around sports grounds and artificial pitches and moving to having a very ecological parks and so on, and all sorts of water conservation and energy measures. And the City of Haarlem and Amsterdam don't know exactly what they want, but they have this high level functional perspective. And then they are going out to the market and they are getting an understanding of what's possible. And then they will also go back to functional specifications, but in a more finer grained way. And that's at the point at which they contract. So I think they're onto it. But the thing is, the innovation partnerships, a lot of people are scared of them and they are very resource intensive. But the mechanism's there, maybe not the experience and the competence.
May I ask you a question? Well, innovation partnership is a new procedure, right? From 2014.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not used very much. Why would you say that it's not used? Because according to my sources, it has been very seldomly used as a procedure.
Yeah, it's resource intensive. People are not familiar with it. In some countries, they don't use it at all. I interviewed someone from Poland who said he checked out what was it, and there was none, right?
Sweden is none also.
Yeah, but other countries are using it. And there's other countries where I think, if you like, maybe there's some, you don't necessarily have to use the instrument to draw some of the ideas and some of the thinking. So this, a market consultation can happen by a number of routes and so on. So the absence of take up doesn't mean it won't be taken up in due course. And it doesn't mean it's not changing the space in which people are working as well. So I would never say in a black and white way, okay, that's not working, full stop. We should throw out these instruments because, 10 years on, they haven't been adopted.
No, I didn't say that. But,
I'm not saying you said it, I'm saying. Yes, and the take up is limited, yeah. And it is the more mature organizations that have organized themselves so they have the capacity to do that. So yeah, there's a long path before they get to the position of using them. But I'm not an expert on the instruments.
Can everybody hear the discussion here? Okay, very well.
So, Vincent, you were asking about functional procurement and change in your environment and so on. Rather than give a sort of a comprehensive overview, can I just throw in some examples of things that resonate with your question? So Jane was saying yesterday that they reached out to the non-procurement people, thinking that it would be a bit of a hard sell, really, and it wasn't, was it? Because once she was able, or her and her team were able to talk about it, that every pound spent in the local community was going to help with the economic regeneration. That's the language that they understood. That's what meant something to them. Last week, I was at a big conference with medical people, and what they were talking about is planetary health and their concern there. So when you say, okay, if you are now recognizing that your Hippocratic oath goes beyond just the patient, towards thinking about the wider community and the damage you're doing with all your disposables and your dangerous gases that you're using and so on. There we're talking planetary health and scope 3, and that's where procurement comes in. And I would talk about mobilizing your supply base to achieve your objectives. Probably wouldn't use the P word because that's not what they are going to connect with. What they will think is, oh, procurement, I couldn't get the laptop because they're just such a pain and they don't deliver what I need. So sometimes it's about, how it's positioned. And also I think the economic pressures is another language, another term. So the unaffordability of healthcare going forward, that can actually galvanize attention. So it's a bit like earlier me saying we don't put innovation in the front if it's sustainability that gets them going. So what is it that they connect to? And then, yes, some awareness raising and some skill training.
Professor Lynch insists on asking a question, so I'll indulge you just this one. 30 seconds.
30 seconds. I just want to just respond to that. Delivering procurement sessions to non-procurement professionals wasn't easy. In the end, they got it, but it did take a while. But we'll talk about that this afternoon. Thank you.
Okay. But you said they did buy into it, right? Once you found the hook. Yeah. Okay. I've lost track of the questions. Where to next? Stop. No, I don't know. I'm losing track of all the different questions we had from different people. Theory of change from a product point of view. Barbara, what kind of product are you referring to?
It's just that I've seen the theory of change mainly only used in a qualitative social services sector type projects, and I'm trying to think through how it could be applied in a different
if you do
context.
functional procurement, it's a non-issue. But if you are still buying a product, I guess you'd see the product in use or something. So rather than just limiting it to, the product as traded and between you and your supplier, you would have to take a more holistic perspective.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very, very much. Warm round of applause to Louise and Charles for wonderful insights. Louise, I confirm again, is Professor in Public Sector and Healthcare Procurement at Twente University in the Netherlands, and Charles is the Ruben Rousing Chair in Circle. That's the Chair in Innovation Research Center for Innovation Research at Lund University in Sweden. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Thanks, Prof. G. Thank you very much. I am minded to just quickly reflect on where we are in terms of the program and in terms of time. The time is 10:40. We should be starting our break, but we are only starting the second aspect of session one. That's Mr. Engelbrecht and Mr. Logard from SALGA. The gentleman, Matarutse, is not here, so it makes it that much easier for the panel discussion that will be taking place now between Engelbrecht and Lorgard, specifically public procurement and innovation in the local government context. Now, that session is supposed to be from 10:10 until 10:40. In other words, it's supposed to be 30 minutes. So we're going to make it a 20-minute discussion, please. We're going to cream 10 off this particular discussion. There are two speakers in any event, so in a debate, you probably get more in than just sort of speaking unchallenged, because we can get to the nub of the issues. May I therefore request that the members of this particular panel come up to the stage, please. That is Mr. Isaiah Engelbrecht, Divisional Head, Innovation and Knowledge Management, IKM, in the city of Tshwane here in Pretoria, South Africa specifically, and Mr. Mohammed Logard of the South African Local Government Association, SALGA. Thank you. Thank you very much. We are on. We are all set to go. Now, I'm just quickly going to reference that if there's one person in this room who is passionate and has extensive views about what can happen at SALGA, it is this guy here in front of us, Gio Quina. Every other word is what's local government, the potential at local government, the rewriting of the MFMA, and so he's got. In other words, I'm saying this because I want you to anticipate a question from him. But having said that, when you engage in the South Africa context, the Auditor General reports, we look forward to mid-year the reports that speak to the expenditure profile of local government in this country, give or take 300 such municipalities, the majority of whom simply are not bringing home the proverbial bacon. Irregular, wasteful, fruitless are just common terms that every South African expects to hear, does hear, and is no longer shocked at hearing them. And the question is, forget the human capital capacity that can be and must be attended to, because we know the problems around that. But in terms of the systems itself that are available, or the opportunities to, assuming that the capital question, the human capital question is okay, Mr. Engelbrecht, what have you seen, if anything, that speaks to the potential of local government to infuse in how it operates innovation?
There we go. Thank you for that loaded question. And I think first, Gio, also just to mention and say, I really do welcome this conference. I've really grappled with innovation for well over 20 years. And I didn't know that this was coming, and it's long overdue. And I'll share why I say that. So, program director, I think also I need to mention I'm not a procurement expert, but rather I know much about management of innovation. And I think that's where I really like your point, Prof. This is also for me the first conference that I attend where procurement and innovation practitioners come together to discuss this. From a local government point of view, if I can share some thoughts, program director, and perhaps also refer to the city of Tshwane. My time in the city, the last 5 years, and I came from private sector as an entrepreneur into the city, so it wasn't easy. But that's where the rubber hits the tar. It's normal for me on any given day outside my office to have people protesting. But what we realized, the same people that are protesting often have solutions for the problems that they have, but we don't have the platforms to facilitate that. To that effect, we realized then 5 years ago as the city, we need to draft an innovation strategy. So we're in the second round of our innovation strategy now. And I must say, with significant success and won awards, but you may then ask the question, why are we not seeing the impact? And I think procurement would be one of the challenges, but also we still have to scale that strategy. And I'm sure you have many questions around the city, but remember, let's remain focused about why we're here. And I think this then presents a significant opportunity for innovation. So in the strategy, to answer your question, one of our 5 key pillars speaks about a multi-helix ecosystem, innovation ecosystem, where we're saying, let's understand the actors within the city and the role that they have to play in the innovation ecosystem. And we've done that for the city as well. And this is why we work with entrepreneurs to scale their innovations in the city. Because that's a significant opportunity to leverage off and get results for innovation. Perhaps also, if I may, Chair, just share my opening remarks regarding what you asked me. In the meeting, we had extensive discussions around the culture for innovation and the importance actually of that culture to facilitate this procurement that we're discussing. Now, I should mention that DSI with Salga, TIA, there's a tool that's currently being rolled out called MIMI, Municipal Innovation Maturity Index. And we part of that program, and really what it aims to facilitate is to increase innovation maturity levels within municipalities for this to happen, what we're discussing. And we've seen almost as a role, my role as an entrepreneur within the city, when innovators come, I have to fight the internal battle to get a hearing for what the innovator has to say. But if the culture is not ready for that, then how will you get the support? So from that point of view, we really welcome Mimi, and we've done a lot of work in that space. Now, if we look at open innovation, and I like the discussions where I never knew that innovation, open innovation, can be seen as a form of functional procurement. I now have a word for it. I just know when we have these open innovation challenges, and you have to understand why I get extremely excited around this. The first open innovation challenge was launched in 2008 in ESCOM, and it took me a year to convince management to do that. Since then, I've done many, and with very, very few, almost zero adoption in terms of procurement. So this is then quite significant. So when we deal then with open innovation, we have then seekers and solvers. And the seeker comes then in with the specification that we're saying. And Dr. Platinga, I don't want to expose you, but as an open innovation expert, we've wrestled with him in terms of how do you draft that spec. And as a city, we've ran well over 30 open innovation challenges where we have to specify what we want without limiting the entrepreneurs. And this is why, again, why this is extremely fruitful for us. Program Director, I just have my final two
I'm going to give you a chance to mention those points. I beg
Okay.
your pardon for that, but I am interested, as an IKS specialist, when you adopted that innovation strategy, who was in the room?
As IKM, so it's innovation and knowledge management. So really, literally, almost everyone, if I can say that, and I'm saying that carefully, we developed it internally, and then we took it through the process, EXCO and the mayoral committee got the approval. But we've developed the ecosystem. We have a movement now in Tshwane, partnerships with universities and many other players that had insight and gave input to the strategy. So with many of these open innovation challenges, we work with the ecosystem. So we still have a lot of work to do, actually, to get more people to know and implement the strategy, but we really did our best to implement or involve everyone in the development of that.
Here's why I asked that question, and Mr. Logart, perhaps you can engage from a SALGA perspective to the extent that it lands with you. Communities oftentimes are frustrated by the fact that the community will identify need A and see public interventions addressing item B. In other words, the conversation is nothing for us without us. To what extent is the arrangement of how the state operates genuinely contemplates the voice where the public spend or the public service is going to take place? To what extent, when that should happen, or in the processes that ultimately deliver that, is the community voice considered, and what stake, to the extent that it is, does it genuinely have?
Thank you so much. Yeah, and thank you for the opportunity as well. I'm actually representing my colleague, Mr. William Moroka from SALGA. I'm actually in the municipal finance space at SALGA. But we are heavily involved in the issues of supply chain management, etc. So I think the question that you're asking about the community involvement, I think maybe we can look at it from two levels. I think the one part maybe to indicate is from a legislative perspective, there's something called the IDP process, and that actually makes it compulsory for there to be community engagement in terms of actually the IDP for the municipality. So in terms of the actual process and in terms of the, let's call it the accountability cycle, I think from the planning of a municipality in terms of what they plan to do in a term of a 5-year period or an annual plan, the community has to be engaged. And then obviously the priorities for different communities, etc., are then identified. And then based on that, they basically then develop the plans, you know, over the multi-year period, trying to break it down per annum as well. So yes, so I think, how do I say, it's a requirement in terms of legislation. It does happen. I must be honest, some municipalities do it better than others. Some of them do it from a very much compliance basis to say, yes, we've done the session, we've had a community engagement, we can tick the box. You know, they'll probably document what was asked, etc. But there may not be some further action taken in terms of that. Whereas there are other municipalities who do it much more effectively. They'll actually have the engagements. They'll actually have plans that talk to what the community actually requires. And they'll actually have sessions where they give feedback as well to say, this is what we plan to do. This is what we have done. Here's the progress we are doing in terms of what you've asked for, etc. And it works very well because there's an active community engagement that takes place in some of those areas.
Let me work on the assumption that happens and happens optimally. I'm minded to reflect then on two former finance ministers, respectively. Trevor Manuel recently, can you imagine, I was going through TikTok and he laments the fact that, and he was making a reference to KwaZulu-Natal, that there are over 200 councillors in local municipalities who either or both cannot read, so this document to them is useless, nor are they able to engage numbers. So a financial statement would mean nothing to that person who's a councillor. Nhlanhla goes on to say that in the municipalities themselves, something like 80% plus of those who are CFOs do not have the requisite qualifications. So let's assume these conversations are happening. Now, where the rubber hits the tar in terms of decision-making and voting, allocation of funds, and from just a pure procurement perspective, when the warm bodies in those spaces, just to use these two examples, and they're not too different from the reality for the most part, I would imagine, cannot engage critical data, is there even room for a conversation on innovation? I'm asking this question because irrespective of who says what, the Auditor General tells us we have a problem, a serious problem. Kimi Makwethu, her predecessor, was minded to even rest the initiative in terms of some power, because even when these things are said out there, there isn't even a consequence of any kind or a structural reform of any kind. Now, assuming what you have said, Mr. Logard, what can be done, if anything, about the fact that to even be a councillor, anybody in this room qualifies, for so long as he or she can garner enough votes?
Thank you for that. I think we need to also be clear about maybe two or three things. So in an accountability cycle, you've got officials who are responsible for the doing part, and you've got councillors, and let's call it there's an oversight element as well. So I do agree that yes, for obviously from an official's perspective, they must have the competency to be able to do what they need to do. And I think by and large, there has been a lot of efforts that have taken place in terms of trying to deal with that. So as an example, from our side as SALGA, together with our other stakeholders, COPTA and Treasury, there are certain things that have been put in place. So when it comes to the issue of CFOs as an example, there is something called a minimum competency framework that is in place. So for the CFO to be appointed, you need to have certain levels. So some of them may have it, some of them may not have it. By and large, I think over time, many of them have been through that course. But again, going through a course does not make you competent. So somebody may have a qualification, they may have done the MCF, qualification, and there may be somebody who may have not done the MCF qualification, but the person who may not have done it may be very, very proficient, maybe skilled, highly knowledgeable, but just hasn't been through the formal process. Whereas on the other side, it could be vice versa. So I'm saying those things are there, and I think there are efforts in terms of trying to address it. The other issue to maybe also raise is that when it comes to the issue of councillors, yes, I think there is definitely space for us to capacitate further. There's a lot of capacity building that does take place from the time a councillor is appointed throughout the life of a councillor as well. We do capacity building to try and actually capacitate them to do oversight more effectively. But I think the other thing that's very important to note is, and we're talking about the innovation topic broadly, the environment we're sitting in a local government space is very rigid. And I understand why. So again, you've got different levels. You've got a city, that city of Swane and the other eight, maybe the other cities in the country who are maybe at much mature levels that they can start looking at doing things innovatively, having things done in a different way, etc. But you've also got on the other side of the spectrum, municipalities who aren't getting the basics right. So in terms of those, you understand that you need a system that is very rigid, tells them from point A to point B, this is what you need to do, this is how it must be done, etc., etc. And even that's not being done.
And that doesn't sound like innovation, does it?
That's not innovation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Engelbrecht, I know you're dying to share. I'm minded to leverage your expertise and the space in which you're operating. Knowledge management. We are in the information age. The information is a serious commodity. How you package it, how you make it accessible, and how you commercialize it. Speaking as an entrepreneur, you would know that is a serious game changer. This is largely a sophisticated society, the city of Tshwane. It houses the capital, and there's a lot of skill available to it because of the commercial center that Gauteng is. Are you in a position to share anecdotally how information, well managed, packaged, presented, has yielded serious innovations, even that blindsided you, but nonetheless are things that going forward are things that you can take and use, and if not use, certainly can be shared elsewhere, more particularly with some of the troublesome spaces that Mr. Logard has made reference to.
Switches on and off. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Thank you for the question. And
You switch it on and off. I'm teasing, buddy.
So it was planned. I don't know. There we go. I'll just speak. And thank you for not asking me to respond to that, because that's above my pay grade. I don't work with national municipalities. But I do have one point to make. One of the biggest challenges we have when it comes to innovation, we have these loose, informal, opinionated discussions. We don't clarify what it is for us, and therefore the discussions often don't get to a point where we really have impact. I think as innovation practitioners, once you understand it, you have to break it down to such a point where it makes sense to counselors and even to your lowest level employee. And now that's easier said than done, and I think that will make a huge difference. In terms of knowledge, let me take one perspective. For the last 20 years, I've defined innovation as the process of turning knowledge into value. In other words, facilitating the flow for knowledge to a point where it adds value. Now, this knowledge I'm speaking about is a combination of tacit and explicit knowledge, but packaged often in an idea, this thing we call an idea. And that flow is a fascinating journey. So to answer your question, perhaps, and I hope it's more directly, is when we then package ideas, and I made a reference to open innovation earlier.
Yeah.
That's where we ask communities, and we currently exploring a community-based innovation challenge. We're saying communities should not raise the challenges, but rather bring the ideas forward. But we're still grappling with it. So when these ideas are packaged, then the journey starts for that to create value. And one, well, there's many examples, but really, when we reach out as the city to say, yeah, 4 open innovation challenges, then anyone, whether the person is unemployed, a company, a student, then responds to this. That's when we start and work with them and formulate the idea and present it to various committees along the way. Now, the other day at the colloquium, I mentioned this idea, and I guess it's perhaps, some call it far-fetched, but a group of TUT students came to us when we had one of these challenges, and we made the point to say, from a revenue collection point of view, the city has severe financial challenges, but currently we are being owed over 20 billion by our customers. And in some cases, the customers doesn't have the money to pay. So they said, why don't we build you this platform where you can barter with these clients, where they can provide services against the account, what they owe the city. And when we took that back to the city, first, you would imagine all the rules, hands came up and say, how will you do this? How will you manage risk? But now our EXCO is considering the report, and we'll see how it goes. Because really, and just to explain, the most basic example I shared the other day was to say, one of our service delivery challenges is cutting grass in parks. And quite often around the same park, you have people staying there with equipment, and they owe the city. Why can't they cut the grass and then get a discount on their bill? But it grows into more complex solutions. And we've seen many of such solutions. But, and perhaps just one point to that, with some of the ICT and other related pilots that we've hosted in the city, and I think quite successfully, positive results. We haven't been able to adopt it, implement, procure the solutions. We often send the entrepreneur off to say, thank you very much, the pilot was successful. We write articles and we celebrate. And then we help them, they scale their businesses, create jobs. That's a positive spin-off. But we haven't felt the impact ourselves yet from many of those solutions.
Interesting. But I am minded to reflect on the fact that, and we're going to go to the questions literally after this statement, that either of our colleagues on the stage can tackle. you seem to have ideas, or you certainly are in a position to attract ideas. But I think one of the things that presumably would even stifle you and your levels of enthusiasm is the fact that sometimes it takes you a year to get council approval, or to get those, to use a term that you've used, above your pay grade, to think alongside you. And by the time, say, whatever it is, that is that next big idea is in a position to be implemented, the earth under your feet has moved a bit because of technology, or the person, him or herself, they've gone on to bigger and better things, or where the environment was a little more receptive to their idea. So in other words, there's also a bit of a loss in the process, not least because you have to carry that enthusiasm. You have to take all the hits in the process and go back to these people and keep them sufficiently interested. How does the culture, the environment, even the regulatory framework, therefore, stifle? In other words, what are the inherent blockages, systemic? Okay, both of you are nodding, so I'm going to give both of you an opportunity to respond, that just simply disallow this culture. In other words, moving away from product-based procurement to really the solutions-driven, innovation-driven type response to service delivery and goods distribution. Mr. Logard.
Thank you for the question. I think I normally term it not product-based procurement. I term it compliance-based procurement, because the environment that we have is not enabling for the issues of innovation. It's very rigid. There's regulations that you've got to be followed. The MFME sets certain things that you must do. And if you try to get out of that box, you've got to request from National Treasury to get deviations or permission and approval, etc. So there is not much space to actually innovate. So for me, I think one of the very important things, and I think the role that maybe, for example, SALGA together with some of the municipalities can play, is to actually lobby the lawmakers to actually make the environment more enabling for these things. I can also maybe say that I can understand that when we embark on such efforts, one of the first things that's going to come out is the issue that it could lead to higher incidences of fraud, corruption, etc., which is a perception out there that the environment itself, as rigid as it is, there is still high levels of irregular activities taking place, etc. But I think it can be countered to again indicate that as long as we can indicate that, and I like the situation to say that as long as we can indicate value for money and any potential coming out from there, then there should be free or freedom or leeway to be able to try and make it more innovative as much as you can.
Sure. Mr. Engelbrecht, before we go to the floor, and I've noted one hand already, I'm taking three.
So you spoke to corruption. I think that's definitely a challenge, and not only in local government, I would imagine. When you implement innovation, you may face a lot of resistance, and it wouldn't make sense, especially if the solution was proven, but then it could be for those reasons. In our case, I think management and political instability, like you say, plays a massive role, because you move forward and back and forth. And yeah, numerous examples that I can mention over coffee. Okay, perhaps we launched what we called an InterVarsity Challenge. This was in 2020 when we launched with our innovation strategy. A lot of excitement, and during that period, it took time to convince our mayoral committee and MACO. And before the launch, the mayor moved on, and then someone else came in, and we had to start the process again, and we had it again. And therefore, like you say, it's a setback, and it takes a lot of time. But yeah, I guess we are resilient. Then the issue of finances and the risk as well. With many of the projects, we have quite a small budget. And maybe here at the next conference, we can present some of the results. But when we identify a project, we often have to leverage, and our partners, TIA and many others, come to the party and say, so we don't have the funds necessarily even to pilot an experiment. So you have to find the resources, etc., and then fund even the project that what you want to pilot. Then perhaps lastly, the element of risk and failure, because you would imagine in local government, compliance is quite important. And then that was one of my biggest challenges when I joined public sector from private sector, to understand value. I thought we have to do things, and we have to, but if you don't comply, then nothing has happened. So because of compliance and the rigid systems in many cases, you would find people are not willing to support these new innovations because there's generally no incentive as well to support innovation. So why should you take a risk? If it fails, you'll bear the consequences, but if it's successful, it's often not then linked to you. So it stifles innovation.
Yeah, let's go to the floor. I've got one, I've got two, I've got three. Jonathan, Charles, Chris.
Okay, great. Thank you, Songezo, and thank you to the two panel members. Continuing on with the theme of the overlap between public procurement and innovation, and we don't often get to that, but we don't often get the third factor, which is the local government sector. And that's what you two have both been speaking to. So Songezo and I and some others were at a event about 10 days ago, hosted by the city's support program of Treasury. And they were supporting a concept called creative procurement. And I think maybe others, for me, I was interacting with it for the first time, and a few of us were asking, you know, where does it fit? Where does it overlap? But it definitely seemed to be in the local governments. It was an architect who has written this book, and then the World Bank, I guess, had funded him to come to the city support program and begin to punt this idea. But it definitely seemed to be a little bit of a sense of pushing back against that compliance framework and really doing that from an urban studies, from a kind of local government, you know, a completely autonomous sphere of government, as we know from the Constitution. So I guess that's my question, is whether that notion of creative procurement, or if you want to describe it in functional terms, as taking a little bit of liberties with some of that compliance. I hear the points about anti-corruption and guardrails, but just in order to get things done. Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan. Charles?
I wanted to respond to your question. What is the culture? And to me, that is a very loose term. It could be minus, plus, or anything. But in the field of innovation, there is a more specific concept developed, and that's system of innovation or national innovation system. And these are things that have been developed for the last 30 years. And it is a much more specific a system of innovation is all the determinants of innovation processes, and those determinants is what you want to influence by means of innovation policy. That's my point, and I wanted also to respond or to comment on this about creative procurement. Of course, procurement is an important part of any innovation system. It's there, and it can be analyzed. But I'm curious about this new concept of creative procurement, which I don't know what that is, and that's I think it's important for all of us that if we use a new term, we have to tell the world or the people what it means. We had a long discussion yesterday or the day before yesterday on innovation. What is that? And we have to know that in order to be able to pursue and develop an innovation policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, Jonathan will be on stage at some point during the game. I mean, during the day. So you have a point in limine that you need to engage. Quickly summarize your understanding anyway of creative procurement in response to the good professor. Professor Eukens.
Thanks, and guys. So just a quick. This point really turns on the interesting thing about this session, this conference, because it brings together so many ideas and then also important people in South Africa who are helping draft the next rules. So I wanted to respond to your point about the 200 illiterate councilmen, council members. Actually, my experience in working in local government as a local government decision-making official, it was much more important that I maintain gravitas. They really didn't care if I was smart. They cared that I maintained a certain, in order to maintain the integrity of the community, that I proceed in a certain way. So I'm not actually that concerned about illiterate council members. I have to regularly make decisions in other languages. For instance, I have to understand Arabic, and I don't speak Arabic. I'm illiterate when it comes to Arabic, but I have to be able to gather data regarding Arabic to be able to make decisions about, how procurement systems might work. And to do that, I need an information aggregator. And this goes to the question of the implementation of the procurement bill. The procurement bill, and this is a highly technical point, the procurement bill refers to data that's publicly available. Data that'll be available to information aggregators. It has to be interoperable. That's the wrong word. I think the word is it has to be machine readable, and that those who are writing the regulations have to understand that the goal is machine readability. So the information regarding procurement, regarding things that are going on, can be aggregated for the 200 illiterate council members so they can make easy sense of it. I'm sure they're perfectly smart. Once they have the information aggregated and presented to them in a form that's more understandable, just like I have to understand Arabic, the whole system can move forwards. But the open data requirements, it has to be machine readable so that the intermediaries can aggregate that data and present it.
I would need more time to engage that. I mean, I don't dismiss your point, and I think also the American context is quite dissimilar to our context. I mean, every society is unique, but I think for us it presents more problems than perhaps it could or should, as, for instance, your point is perfectly made. But I'm going to give the platform to Messrs. Logard and Engelbrecht, respectively, to respond to anything and offer final remarks, please.
For those inputs and questions as well. I think, the point about the creative procurement is something that's interesting. And I think it's something that definitely it should be encouraged, I must be honest. As I mentioned, the system itself currently, if you try to do things out of that, let's call it the box, then you're going to basically run the risk of having certain non-compliances if you don't follow some of those things. And again, the repercussions or the consequence management of that is basically the funds that you spend could be regarded as irregular, and then that comes with its own negative connotations. So I think as I mentioned, for me, I think what's very important is for us then to engage the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer at National Treasury itself, also the planning units as well, to indicate that maybe for certain areas, and maybe the issue of urban planning is something that you can have scope, because obviously planning in terms of urban areas, you want to have things that are looking at more like, green concepts, etc. And maybe if those things weren't there in the past, maybe this creative procurement can basically bring these things in. So, and maybe we can, pilot it in that specific area in terms of doing it, and then see from there if it works well, to then maybe look at other areas as well. The other thing I want to maybe just touch on quickly, Program Director, that one of the previous professor talked about, which I liked it, was the issue that I think in one of the European countries where they say that the small municipality outsourced all the small procurement to some outsourced companies and focus mainly on the big infrastructure things that they need to focus on. I think it's something we should maybe consider as well, because we spend a lot of time in South Africa doing let's call it the consumable or operational procurement that takes place on a regular basis, and it takes up a lot of time of the actual officials. I think if they can be freed up to look at some of the other things which are more strategic in nature, I think it could definitely add value and definitely assist in the local government space to be more effective. And maybe the last point, regarding the inputs about the machine readable data, etc. I think it definitely could assist, to a large extent. However, I think the other thing that we've also picked up from a negative point of view is that if a councillor doesn't have the basics to be able to interrogate and understand what is being presented to him or her, there's also the tendency for our officials to spin or let's just say to basically spin a story to them. And what we've seen it with our own, where we engage with the municipality, and when we paint a picture to indicate to the mayor and to the MMs, well, to the councillor, that your municipality is actually in a very bad financial state, they look shocked. And then they sometimes in front of us, they're asking the CFO, but CFO, you normally portray me a picture to say that everything is fine. We're in a healthy situation. So what is the real situation here? And I think if they had that minimum understanding of reading a set of financial statements, understanding whether certain things were doing well or not doing so well, they would have picked up a much earlier stage that things actually are in a bad state. So I think it works both ways, and I think they do need to have certain minimum level of actual understanding to be able to exercise their oversight capabilities as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, creative procurement, I would also like to understand more. And of course, one shouldn't be thinking of bypassing procurement processes with it. And no, I'm just using it in a different context. One of the things that perhaps is not creative procurement, but continuous improvement sector, we have to map and optimize many processes in the city, but we don't have the capacity. So we've partnered with universities as part of their development. These students come in and they map processes, simulate processes, and it's so meaningful to us, but they get real experience. But I would like to understand more around it. Certainly from an innovation point of view, myself and the innovation community, we're armed with many years of experience and challenges. We need the expertise of the procurement scholars to guide us to the next step. In terms of Prof. Charles, the National System of Innovation, yes, it is active, but I can clearly say local government, in our case in South Africa, is a stepchild to the National System of Innovation. They are. And I can confirm this, even the last 4 years that I spent on NECI as advisor to Dr. Blade and the community there, local government doesn't feature much. And I know there's a lot of work being put in place. We heard our colleagues from TIA spoke about it yesterday, and we see the traction. But in local government, that's really where the rubber hits the tar. There's no luxury sometimes, even for research, etc. We need solutions yesterday, and we need to run with it. So therefore, any input from that perspective would be welcome. Just in terms of what is innovation, for those that don't know, innovation now has approved standards as well, ISO standards. Not all of them are approved, but certainly there's a definition for innovation, ISO 56004. There's a series of innovation standards to standardize what we mean with innovation. And I think that becomes very useful, especially in conversations around this, because we say the same things and we speak to the same thing. Then Prof. Charles, just through Hugh, will engage. I'm part of a global community, Innovation 360, and they're based in Sweden with the world's largest innovation database. Now there's 16 aspects, and 2 of those deal with supply chain matters. And my eyes have opened. I never made a link to this, so I'm looking forward to further engagement in terms of that. Prof. Hukens, in terms of the 200 counselors, yes, it is a challenge. As I said earlier, it's quite important to break down your innovation strategy or language for everyone to understand. We've gone a long way to train some of our counselors in partnership with UCT around what innovation is, etc., and in different languages as well. But that clarity is quite important. Chair, just the last 2 points as closing remarks. The question around risks, with many or most of the pilots we've run in the city, I think that's a process of risk mitigation from a procurement point of view. Because before we start the pilot, you would imagine how departments interact with that pilot because they don't want to damage the environment, whether it's electricity or roads, etc. So experiments, piloting, etc., I think that's clearly a form for risk mitigation. And as I end, perhaps now we have a case for what I like to call FCFs, functional procurement facilitators, because I guess that can start tomorrow. Some one or people in the audience that can facilitate between us as innovation practitioners and this community to make sense of what we want to do as we work towards changing the law and guidelines. Thank you, sir.
There's plenty to look forward to in local government and what innovation can certainly offer. Certainly for South Africa, there's much room to move. One or two things need to be corrected, obviously, but there's certainly no reason to lose any hope. And I have to thank Mrs. Logard and Engelbrecht for their insights, for their willingness to actually engage in even some of the potentially uncomfortable issues. I think we know the local government context in South Africa. You don't just really speak what you really think. We've got to be a little bit more careful. Wisega, thank you so much. Please come through with the gifts as we allow Professor Kino to hand over to the guests as we offer our gratitude to them for their wonderful presentations, ladies and gents. Time. I need to be creative, yeah. I need to be creative with time. We're taking a break. We are now sitting at 25 past. Let's start, please, with Professor Shorpe at 11:35. In 10 minutes from now, please, could I just request that we cut? Come again? Oh, Professor Eukens first. Very well. I beg your pardon. Prof. Eukens, will you be ready in 10 minutes? Yeah, sure. In 10 minutes, Professor Eukens, who is from the United States, will be offering perspectives on the implementation of innovation partnerships through the Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR program, a critical assessment thereof. Immediately thereafter, Professor Williams, and then Mr. Kitu, all of them addressing for 20 minutes on the platform. See you in 10 minutes, everybody.
One, two. I think it was.
We're going to be trickling in. Thanks, ladies. Thanks, gents. Thanks, ladies. Thanks, gents. The Lynn David Research Professor in Government Procurement Law at the George Washington University School of Law. He's also a fellow in the Acquisition Innovation Research Center in the United States, Professor Chris Eukins, to talk to us about the implementation of innovation partnerships through Small Business Innovation Research Program, critical assessments thereof in the context of the United States. Prof. Eukins, I will be super strict with you because we simply do not have the luxury of time. So, sir, it's 11:36. I'll get up at 11:54 so that at 11:56 you are done. I'll give you 2 minutes to be uncomfortable.
This age, it's all the time. So I'm very mindful that I have to go quickly because Chope is coming after me, and Chope has played this trick on me before. Fool me once, Chope. So we were in Trinidad together, and I stood up and I gave a long, boring policy presentation on anti-corruption. And then Chope came behind me, and she was a rock star. She grabbed my microphone, and she walked down in the audience. People were going crazy over Chope. So I am just going to give a nice short presentation and then give the floor to our own Bruce Springsteen, rockstar Chope Williams. So I want to talk to you about innovation partnerships, which we call Small Business Innovation Research, SBIR, in the United States. Innovation partnerships, as you heard from many speakers, have not really taken off in the European Union. The European Union stole the idea of innovation partnerships from the Americans. How do I know this? I sat through a PhD defense where that was the entire PhD defense explaining how the idea was stolen. SBIRs have been more successful, and there's been a good deal of interest in the rooms over the last couple of days on SBIRs, and I want to walk through SBIR with you to explain what it is. I'm a little bit biased against them. I'm not a huge fan, but I'll try to be as objectively critical as I can be. Okay, Songeso gives you a little bit of background on me. I just want to touch on one other thing, is that I also worked for 10 years on the UNCITRAL model law, the UN model procurement law. And that's very important to be aware of as you move forward and reform here in South Africa. Botswana's most recent procurement law is based almost exclusively on the UNCITRAL model procurement law. As an example, you cannot understand Botswana's new procurement law unless you're aware of the UNCITRAL model procurement law. So it's an important backdrop to reform here, really around the world, and I encourage you to just be aware of it and take a look at it. So this is the Small Business Innovation Research Program. By the way, I borrowed a slide here from the Small Business Administration. This is in a nutshell. It's 3 basic phases. In the first phase, the agencies that are going to fund these innovative projects throw up a solicitation. They're typically they start about this time of year, at the beginning of the fiscal year in October. They're thrown up on a common website at sbir.gov. And if you have an idea that meets what the agency wants, then you come in and you can get between $50,000 and $275,000. American terms, this is a pretty small grant. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm not crazy about this, because it really not only is it limited to small businesses, but oftentimes limited to really small businesses. One of the joke names we have of this is old guys in garages. Old guys in garages will come up with their ideas. It's a little unfair because there have been some really interesting, innovative things that have come out of this. But the people who tend to participate in this tend to be people who are good at bureaucracy. They tend not to be the radical innovators. They tend to be people who are good at bureaucracy. So that's a first slight problem with the program. The phase 2, if the agency likes what you're doing with your innovative idea, they can give you further money for technology development. That's for a 24-month period, for $750,000 to $1.8 million. So you see, there's more funding in phase 2. Then phase 3 is commercialization. And commercialization can either be out into the commercial marketplace or it can be into the government marketplace. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. I'm going to take the SBA slides, the Small Business Administration slides, and kind of turn them upside down in just a minute to give you a more critical view. More data from the Small Business Administration, more key points. So about 4,000 companies are funded every year through this program, about 4,000 companies. About $4 billion is pumped into this program. And I'm going to talk to you in a minute about where that money comes from. And the government takes no equity stake in the companies it's funding. It has no equity. So from an entrepreneur standpoint, this is a very attractive source of funding, because instead of giving up a chunk of my soul, which is an equity share of my company, to a funder, I get to keep all the equity as an entrepreneur. Also, and this is very important, the government takes no intellectual property rights. And that is also critically. That's like taking a check of the entrepreneur's brain. He does not want to give away any of the intellectual property. The government takes no intellectual property rights under this program. Sharp contrast to what goes on in the rest of government procurement, and I'm going to talk about that in just a second. Okay, some of the risk points in this process. First of all, how do you choose what you're going to fund? How do agencies choose what they're going to fund? The answer is by specific direction of the Small Business Administration. They're not supposed to look for things that are going to make the whole economy richer. They're not going to look for things that drive innovation forward in the economy. Agencies are supposed to identify things that are good for small business, which is a relatively narrow band. So I'm not going to come up with global cybersecurity solutions, which is a pressing need in our economy. Instead, I'm going to come up with things that a small business can do with regards to cybersecurity. So it's a niche, and it's not necessarily the best way to slant the funding. The next risk area is the valley of death. The valley of death is going from phase 2 funding to phase 3 commercialization. So many companies, so many ideas died during that period, because once the initial funding has dried up, then you have to try to get to commercialization with no funding. Remember, these guys have gone to the government for money in the first place. They haven't learned necessarily at the outset how to go to the commercial marketplace to get commercial capital. So they are at real peril of dying in the valley of death. And I'll give you some statistics on that in a minute. The last risk is that under the Small Business Administration guidance, these guys have a sole source preference in procurement. And that may sound a little, technical and obscure. It's really important. It means that at the beginning, okay, when some contracting person and agency is trying to figure out, okay, what are we going to ask for this year? What is our SBIR agenda? That vague idea of the technology, which is not driven by the agency's technological goals, but is driven by what's good for small business, that vague vision, let's say, cybersecurity solutions for watches. Okay, let's get some SBIR proposals on that. 10 years down the road, if the government is really concerned about soldiers in combat having their watches penetrated, it's a cybersecurity risk, okay? 10 years down the road, the government can be stuck with a sole source solution. Whoever won that SBIR award has a sole source preference 10 years down the road during phase 3. It's really dangerous, because the government may be funding the wrong technology and may be stuck with the wrong technology on a sole source preference. So that's an area of risk as well to think about. A lot of these risks come from the basic fact that the Small Business Administration is the administrator, it is the rule maker, and it's the advocate all at once. The Small Business Administration controls this whole thing. And if any agencies try to push the Small Business Administration aside, say, oh, by the way, I really don't want to run the program, the SBA doesn't care. The SBA responds to one thing, which is Congress, because the small business community hounds members of Congress. I want the government to do something for me, and SBIR is one of those solutions. So SBA and Congress like the SBIR solution, but isn't necessarily the best way to run the government, the best way to foster innovation in a government that has a diversified set of needs, not just serving the small business community. Some other issues are, I told you about the statistics, okay? There are very few, and a former student of mine, I co-wrote an article on this. There's very little data available on how badly phase 3 goes. One of the few data points we have is that in fiscal year 14, across the entire Defense Department, okay, remember there are 4,000 awards every year. Across the entire Defense Department, there were only 79 phase 3 awards in that year, okay? It's only 2% of 4,000, a minuscule number of projects were going into phase 3. Most of the action is in phase 1 and phase 2, which is great if your goal really is to fund old guys in garages. But if you're really trying to build a technological base, this may not be the best way to do it. Another issue is that the SBIR is the money is taken away from research funding that goes through major agencies. Let's say the NIH. NIH has a research budget of over $100 million, so they have to give up 3.2% to SBIR. It is a tax. You're sapping away the strength from these research initiatives in these major agencies in order to pay for SBIR. The good news is that SBIR is actually a minuscule part of federal funding for research and development. The federal budget this year is $204 billion for research and development. Only $4 billion is going to SBIR. So it's actually a really, really tiny program, but you hear about it all the time all over the world because of innovation partnerships, because of the relationship to innovation partners. Everybody talks about it all the time, but it's actually, in American terms, it's a very, very small, relatively small program. Most of the research and development is done through a completely different vehicle. It's done through grants, through universities, regular research institutions. And that's a very, very different structure than the SBIR structure. It's a way of taking money out of the universities and moving it into the guys in garages. That's the whole idea behind this. If you're going to talk about impact of innovation, innovative impact, though, I really want to go back to what we were talking about before about functional specifications and competitive dialogue. We use competitive dialogue, forms of competitive dialogue, for 60% of the procurement in approximately a $700 billion system. Anything serious that's bought is done using competitive dialogue, and you can't really run a competitive dialogue except through functional specifications, because you're looking for the marketplace to present the most innovative solutions against broadly described needs. We heard about the road example, or another example. I have to move patients 20 kilometers really fast because they've been wounded and I have to get them 20 kilometers from here. The way the contractors, the vendors come forward with a solution. They don't just say, oh, ambulances. They'll say, well, we can do it by helicopter, or we can do it by taxi cab. We can do it by llama. That may be the best solution in certain situations. The competitive dialogue brings in innovation because it's asking the marketplace to define the solution as opposed to the government defining the solution. That's the difference between open tendering and competitive dialogue. And that's why 60% of federal procurement is done using competitive dialogue. I've looked very carefully at the draft law for South Africa. It doesn't call out competitive dialogue, but it leaves the space. That procurement bill leaves the space for competitive dialogue. I think that's a much more important contribution potentially to innovation through procurement here, not something like SBIR, although SBIR could fit in as well. Just want to talk about the IP rights very briefly, intellectual property rights. Okay. Remember who runs SBIR? It's the SBA. They don't care about the fact that the agencies don't have intellectual property rights. But if the agency needs to buy the same thing over and over again, and they've paid for the technology, normally they retain license rights so they don't have to pay for the IP over and over and over again. That's how procurement normally works. Because SBA doesn't care about that because it's not their money, they've set up a system where all IP rights are surrendered. Okay, I'm just going to close out. I've given some references here, just quickly to go through these. The third reference is the article that I co-wrote with Crystal Sandier-Funderburg, my former student. There are some researchers, there's some young researchers in the audience. What Crystal did was kind of interesting. We posted her article, and then she did a video introduction. That's what you're seeing there, a picture of her video introduction. She did a video introduction to her article, which is a very useful technique for researcher. For those of you who are parents, you'll understand. So if you watch the video, Crystal has 5 kids. She barricaded herself in for, you can actually hear the kids banging on the door, mom, mom, mom. So it's kind of funny that way, but she did a really nice job in this article, and it's a nice introduction to SBIR. The SBA guidance, which is where the SBA is dictating to the other agencies what to do, that's reproduced there. It's a easily available resource. And most importantly for South Africa, the fellow who heads the SBIR, I had an email exchange with him yesterday. He would be glad to talk with you here about the SBIR program. His name is Eric Page Littleford, and his email address is there, and he heads up SBIR. He does outreach for SBA on SBIR. He would be glad to talk with you about the experience in the program. It's the last thing. We, as many of you know, we do regular webinars. We're doing a webinar next month on, next week actually, on Brazil and anti-corruption. I just wanted to make a quick comment before Songezo ushers me off the stage. That it's been really interesting here. There were references this morning to Mr. Singh referred to the Chief Justice's report on corruption here. What's really interesting and refreshing about the anti-corruption effort here in South Africa is that there's a frankness about the corruption. That people stare right in the face of the corruption. If you're interested in this, the webinar that we're doing is a very nuanced webinar. What's happening in Brazil is President Lula is taking the position that the car wash scandal was a giant fabrication by the political opposition, by Bolsonaro, that it was really illusory, and that the fact that he spent 508 days in jail was not due to corruption, but some sort of conspiracy against him. So there's a false narrative in Brazil right now that really shuts off political discussion about corruption in many ways. But what the webinar will show is that at a technical level, at a legal level and administrative level, anti-corruption efforts are going forward very rapidly in Brazil, despite the fact that there's this logjam in the political narrative because President Lula has to pretend that he was completely innocent. Thanks very much, Songezo.
What a rock star, Professor Chris Eukins. Let me call another rock star, in your words, our Bruce Springsteen equivalent, who's a little immobile, and I'll let her tell the story. If there's a freak accident you need to know about, it's how Prof. Shope sustained her injury. Crazy, crazy, crazy. But we are eternally thankful that she is here. We missed her a couple of weeks ago in Stellenbosch, and she has had the strength to fly up. Quick announcement, we shall have load shedding at 12. If that should happen, it will unfortunately steal 5 minutes of otherwise this very rapid session. Please indulge us as we will just wait for the systems to reboot as they would have yesterday. Prof.
Thank you. Thank you, Songezo. Thank you, Chris. I think I should take you anywhere I'm going as my hype man. Okay, where's the clicker? Where? Green button.
She's a professor, I know.
Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone. Okay, so my name is Shopper Williams, and I work with Professor Kino in Stellenbosch. I'm a professor of procurement law as well, and the deputy director of the African Procurement Law Unit. So let's get this going. Okay, so today I'm just going to talk to you about gender responsive procurement and how we can innovate through that. So we have load shedding, so I'm going to try to be fast so that, when it happens, we're not, we don't have too much lag time. So what is innovation in procurement? Of course, we've been talking about that for the past couple of days, and we've had so many experts. I'm not an innovation expert, I don't claim to be, but we're talking about something that is new, something that is improved. So in procurement, we've heard Professor Edquist talk about, the functional procurement, the process and all that. So for me, when we're talking about innovation, we're talking about newness in terms of a product or a process or a combination of the two, right? So an innovation will be when something is different from what we previously had, what we previously did. If it's not really new, if there's no extension of what we've done before, then we can't claim that there's an innovation. So we can talk about it in terms of an outcome or output or the result of a process, so new products or a new process. And so in procurement, for me, that means that we innovate either by changing or even upgrading, improving our products, or by improving or upgrading our procurement process, right? So it's either the process is being improved or the products are being improved. So innovation procurement is basically doing what we haven't done before, extending our boundaries. And of course, as Professor Edquist has been telling us for the past couple of days, this means that we have to describe if it's products, we have to describe them in terms of their functions, because obviously you can't have innovation if you're describing something that already exists, because then there's nothing new, then it's the same old. So in terms of procurement, the procurement agency specifies what is to be achieved rather than how it is to be done. So what does that mean for gender? What is gender responsive procurement? Some of you have heard me speak on this topic before, and it's something that is very, very important to me for various reasons. But when we talk about gender responsive procurement, we're talking about different things. We're talking about either selecting goods and services in a way that considers their impact on gender equality and on women's economic empowerment. OECD describes it as introducing gender requirements and considerations into public procurement. The European Institute for Gender Equality talks about it in a more expansive manner. So it talks about procurement that promotes gender equality through the purchase of works, supplies, or services in a way that considers the impact of public services on women. So basically it talks about how do we design public services, how do we deliver public services in a way that ensures that those public services don't widen inequalities between men and women. So we can narrow this down to two things. You can narrow gender responsive procurement down to contracting practices. So that means ensuring that we award public contracts to businesses that are owned by women, or ensuring that we award public contracts to businesses that we consider to be gender responsive, even if they are not owned by women, right? So a gender responsive business we describe as a business that considers, that mainstreams gender equality into the business's practices and policies. So that would be a business, for instance, that has, fair pay, that doesn't have a gender pay gap, a business that probably gives parental leave to men and women equally, a business that is sensitive to the needs of men and women. So that would be a gender responsive business. And then we talk about gender responsive procurement in the sense of how do we design public services to ensure that they don't impact women negatively. And why is gender responsive procurement important? A number of reasons. Of course, we've talked about, various speakers have talked about sustainability. And of course, we're using procurement to advance sustainability goals, including gender equality. So gender equality is one of our sustainable development goals. We can't really have sustainable development if we have gender inequality. And when we talk about gender equality, we're just talking about narrowing the gaps, the inequitable gaps between